Hello, everyone, and welcome to Evolving Enneagram's Interspiritual Podcast. I'm Reverend Nhien, founder of Evolving Enneagram, and we are in the midst of our Transformation by Type videos interview series. I am delighted to have Renee Siegel here with me today. Hello, Renee.
Good morning.
Yeah. So Renee here has been an adjunct faculty for the Narrative Enneagram, which is like one of the preeminent Enneagram schools in our entire nation here in the United States. She's the recent co-author of a book called Reclaiming You, Using the Enneagram to Move from Trauma to Resilience. She's also been a mental health counselor, wellness practitioner for over 40 years, taking it from a very holistic perspective. And so we're just delighted to have you here today. And so we've been launching in by sharing, like, how do I actually know you? How did we meet? And as I recall, we met. There's a theme here in most of my interviews. Like, we met in Egypt. Like, Egypt is the place for the Enneagram world, apparently. So I had the blessing of having dinner with a group of folks, including Renee, and was just blessed by her company. And yeah, so that was quite a journey back in Egypt there. But since then is when your book came out. And I want to also share that I have the book and have in my prison ministry work, have actually donated copies to the prison to support them. Yes, I wanted to share that as well. Just, our connection together. So with that, I would love to just launch in, Renee, and invite you to share first how you found the Enneagram and your type.
Yeah. Well, finding the Enneagram was much earlier than finding my type. I was very interested in this process by which we could look at personality patterns through some type of, today I would call it a lot of neurobiology, but back then just the patterns of thinking and feeling and behaving, because I have always questioned the most evidence-based practice in mental health, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, and really questioned why it hasn't been effective. And in search of something that would be more effective with my clients, I've been searching through lots of different personality typologies and mental health interventions, as any good two would, focusing on other people's concerns. And the Enneagram just seemed to make a lot of sense because it was talking about a non-cookie cutter approach to looking at this whole idea that we do have these patterns of thinking and feeling and behaving, and maybe they don't go in the order of a thought precedes a feeling, precedes a behavior. Maybe there's more to it than that. And stumbled upon the Enneagram. A colleague introduced me to the Enneagram. Interestingly enough, when I first typed myself, it was through the Ready, and I typed as a type 7, which I am not. Then took another test and typed as a 7, which I am not. And then began my certification process in the narrative, and landed on 2. David Daniels was my teacher and mentor, and Peter O'Hanrahan. And clearly when I landed on 2, it was just like, I think that visceral, kind of exciting, but also painful realization that I think many of us come to when we've landed on our type that says, oh yes, ooh, oh
Yeah.
yes, ooh.
Right.
And then that was it, but it took a good 2 years. And interestingly enough, why I was typing as a 7 was, it was a time in my life where I have 6 kids, and it was a time in my life where all of them had grown, and I was doing like all these things. I went to Alaska, Hawaii, and Europe, all within a period of like 6 or 7 months during the time I was typing myself. And so my life looked very much like a 7, but I clearly was not a 7.
So, wow. Thank you for sharing that piece of your journey. I think it's so important for folks. First, the reminder that, these online tests they can get us close to our types. Oftentimes it's like one of the top three, maybe, right? But that they're not definitive of type. I think that's an important thing in what you're saying. And also that there is, I think your journey highlights that the journey of discovering our type, well, discovering our type is a journey in and of itself, right? And so there were layers of that, and this has been a theme in a lot of the interviews, actually. Surprisingly, how many professionals that I know actually initially typed as a different number. So if folks are listening, just stay open and continue to inquire. But I definitely resonate with you, Renee, that there's an ouch factor when we discover our type, right? I mean, there's some relief, but there's an ouch factor usually. I would love to hear more specifically if there are pieces or elements of the type 2 description that were particularly difficult for you, or painful, or decisive, maybe. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Happy, and again, that oh yes, ooh, oh yes, ooh. The oh yes was, the easy part of it is being loving and kind and generous, and thinking that everybody else, kind of leads in that way. The ouch factor really had a lot to do with how long it takes to find myself in any given day, even with all the work that I've done, just coming home to myself, and what it takes for me to place my attention back home. Not that every type doesn't have a journey to do that, because I really do believe that every type does. But just learning and watching, noticing, just again, there's a visceral kind of experience where I just can feel a sensate pull on my energy outward. It's just almost like a magnet that goes outside of myself to really focus on whoever it is that I'm talking to, and disregarding myself or leaving myself behind. Not similar to a 9, but just the ouch factor is with a sense of pride, like, oh, I get you, I know this, I can help you. I probably have a lot to share that might be helpful to you, instead of what I think is really pursuing the spiritual journey of all types, and the flavor of 2. It's presence. It's what does it take to really show up and be present. Presence is so different for every type, and in the case of a 2, I think presence is really finding myself before I go out into the world, and so that I'm really present with you, and not just all about how can I be helpful to you, or what can I do to be helpful to you, or to be seen in a certain way. And that's really checking. It really takes some checking in with myself, and sometimes that can be laborious. Sometimes it takes less time than others. It really just depends on so many factors. But I really cannot be available for anybody else unless I'm coming from my home base first. And no matter how much work I've done, I still find that it takes some time for me to. Sometimes it's as simple as just, this is my body, here I am in time and space. I mean, starting there.
Yeah. I so appreciate your humility in describing sort of the ongoing struggle, right? I think so many folks that I find who are newer to the Enneagram really think that we're going to figure this out. It'll be done for good. And it's like, oh, baby, we just started the journey, and it's an ongoing journey. And the default that we all still default to our number, no matter how much work we've done. That's kind of, there's a gravitational pull to the habit of type that without a practice, we will just fall back into. And so I'm curious, you did allude to some practices that help you to come home to yourself. I'd love to hear what some of those practices are. We'll start there, and also maybe how they feel.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really fascinated by and involved in a 3-centered day. every day being a 3-centered day. So one of the things that I will do is to just check in with my 3 centers
Mm,
every day. Um, Checking in with my heart is just as hard, even though I'm a heart center, as it is with any of the other centers. And I think sometimes that people that are new to the Enneagram think that when you find your center, or where the center that your type is in, that makes it easier for you to be able to access that. And that's not true at all. Um, so, sometimes I'll start with one center and sometimes I'll start with another. It's not a beginning place of going up, down, middle down, you
mhm,
know, bottom up. It's really more about wherever I find my awareness. So
mm,
if I find my awareness in some level of discomfort in my body, I might start there. If I find my awareness in a dream, I might start with just allowing myself to just be sweet with myself and
mhm.
honor a dream in the morning. I'm part of a dream group, so I'm invited to write them down. I'm not as good about doing that as I'd like to be because I want to squeeze every last moment of sleep that I can into the morning. And sometimes, sometimes I will start with my heart. Sometimes it'll just be just sometimes the heart centered experience will be just thinking about my day and somebody that I am either enamored with or annoyed by, or just allowing whatever it is. But the tender-hearted curiosity piece
Mm,
that David Daniels was so good at explaining for all of us, that's the place that even allows me to move into the centers. It's coming from a place of not interrogation and not questioning, but this tender-hearted curiosity about, I wonder what's going on with my body today. I wonder what's going on with my heart today. I wonder what's going on with my thoughts today, and then setting an intention for the day. And so that's a practice that I'll do. It's a 3-centered practice. Again, doesn't start with one versus another, and it's preceded by just this kind of a kindness with myself.
mm, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, what you shared, oh, it's just so precious. I feel that sense of tenderheartedness, and I love this notion that what it sounds like to me you do is that um, whatever is alive for you in a moment is like the portal into the rest of you,
Yes.
right? Yeah, yeah. And so you take that and then you go deeper in it. And it sounds like a core to your practice, which yes, is vital to all, but especially for the habit of two being other referencing, that the core to your practice is like a tender-hearted curiosity towards your own interiority.
Mhm.
Where, yeah, and it requires tenderheartedness because it's like there is something about the abandonment the two does to its own like interiority, that
Yeah.
that and the fear that like if I go there, like what will I see? Maybe
Mhm.
some negative feelings
Mhm.
might not affirm my image. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
No,
know.
I love that you use the word abandonment, because one of accompanying what I've just described is this notion that I will not abandon myself again. I know that periodically that will happen, but it is my commitment and conviction with myself that I will not abandon myself again.
So beautiful. Yeah, so precious.
Mhm.
And a practice, right? A practice.
Yes, a practice. It is, yeah, that again, I like that you bring that up because I'm not great at it. I am committed to it. I won't stop it. But I am not great at it. I need to do it oftentimes more than once a day when I've lost myself. Um, but it's nice to have a way to begin the day, a way to at least not leave my sleeping chambers before I've done that. That is
Mhm.
it's like not leaving this room this morning until I've allowed myself to just reflect on the fact that I need to be home.
Uh, uh, and as you mentioned this morning practice, I can't help but notice the beautiful Buddha behind you. And I'm curious if there's an intersection of your Buddhist practice with all of this. And If so, in what way? Yeah.
Well, I was raised Jewish, and yet Buddhism has called me for many, 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 many years. Before I met the Enneagram, just being present again, not even knowing about my two-ness, and coming back into this place of coming back home and being mindful. And it's also the reason that I've done a ton of wellness practitioner certifications, because as a mental health practitioner, in search of why people didn't get well, the body was the missing component. I mean, a big part of it. And coming home to some place that really honors presence, somatic experiences really allow you to deal with that. And when you've been trained that the body is really not anything that you're going to have a conversation, the brain is, we can have
Right.
and health
Right.
practitioners can have a conversation about the brain, but until trauma hit the radar screen around the year 2000, even though the research was done and starting in the 70s, we really didn't regard the body as being so important. And now we know that this human experience that we have, spiritual people having human experiences, we really need to regard all of us.
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like Buddhism has a few elements that have been very important to your journey. One is presence that kind of creates like this like embodied presence, like the invitation,
Embodied presence.
right? Like mindfulness. And maybe, people can misconstrue mindfulness as, being of the mind. And if anything, oftentimes mindfulness is about like this bringing of awareness, for those who are just listening, I just touched my own arm here, to your physicality, in this world. And there's a very pragmatic aspect to Buddhism too, but again, that mindful, like, oh, I'm washing the dishes, but am I here washing the
Right.
dishes?
Right.
Yeah. So,
Like we need a brain. We actually need our neocortex. We need our thinking processes to allow us to move into mindfulness. But the attention then moves from, the thought process that invites us to do that into a place where we're really respecting what is going on in the present moment. And there's nothing like checking in with the body, because the body doesn't know how to do anything other than exist in the present moment.
right.
Your heart does and your head does, but not your body.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful. So I'm very curious, so it took a while after learning the Enneagram to discover your type as a 2. I'm very curious how learning that you are a 2, like, changed your life.
oh, it changed my life in a lot of ways. Um, I've been working with the Enneagram for about 20 years. And because I'm a mental health practitioner, I really believe that therapy and coaching are important. So I've sought them out in the past. Once I knew my type, the way that I engaged with myself in therapy and in coaching practices shifted dramatically.
Mhm.
And I'll give you a couple of examples. One of them is that I was kinder when things didn't go the way I wanted them to go. I was kinder with myself, knowing that I was going to return to this kind of softwared program, hardwared program, I'm not sure what it is, in my type, that was going to take me back, because it thought it was keeping me safe, that the egoic involvement in all of this was so related to survival and keeping me safe. And the compassion that can grow for each of us when we realize that our types are really taking us back to this sometimes contracted place and not a very expansive place, because they really believe that they're keeping us alive, sustaining us, self-preserving us so that we can move from one day to the next. It was just like, oh my goodness, this is so different than anything else I've ever done in therapy or in coaching. So that was one big piece. And then there was some levity that was introduced in the process when I would go and return to these places in my type structure, my character structure. And it was just the ability to laugh at myself was not something I had developed before I met the Enneagram. So finding a way to find some humor in my Jewish motherness, it just
Yeah.
kind of goes out there. And so as a result of that, people saw me really differently. Like they had experienced me, especially my children had experienced me as this very, very helpful, very giving, very loving person. And when I began to watch my type just running itself and began to say, I think you have enough information or you have the resources to solve this on your own, I didn't get the best reception from the people around me at all. It was just like, what happened to this wonderful, loving, generous, kind mother and friend I've had, because she's gone away. We don't like this Enneagram stuff.
Wow. Wow.
So that was another shift.
Mm.
Boundaries around relationships and what I was willing to tolerate and not willing to tolerate, even though I'd been working on boundaries my whole life,
Mm.
really shifted because I realized that if I didn't begin to put them into practice, then my practice of returning home to myself was incomplete. And it will always be incomplete, but I'm just saying that there was a big aha moment around that. So those are 3 examples
Yeah.
of changes, big changes.
Yeah, those are systemic, like paradigm changes in how you approach your life, and in the arena that twos tend to care about the most, approach your relationships, right? Approach your life, approach your relationships. And I'd love, if one comes to mind, I'd love to hear. Well, okay, I have 2 different questions. One is I'd love to have a specific example of a time when, like, maybe you did something differently and you got a different response in those relationships, and how you handled that response. What?
Sure.
Yeah, we'll start there.
So I'll give you an example with one of my children because that's the easiest one to think about. It's my the clearest one that comes to mind. My daughter had gone to graduate school in the UK. She came home and I met her in Orlando, uh, and we spent a couple of days together before she was going to either return to San Diego or Arizona. And she was talking about what she wanted to do now that she'd gotten her master's in food science and was, wanting to launch a career. And she wasn't a dietitian, and but she wanted to be really clear that she wanted to do food science work. And I was really interested in having a conversation about that part of it, the food science part of it and the differences, but she really wanted me to tell her what to do.
Mm.
She said, I could do this and I could do this. And what do you think I should do? And in the past, before all of this Enneagram business, I would have definitely said, well, we can look at the pros and the cons, or what do you think? But this is what I think. What I think always would be a major part of the conversation.
Mm.
And what I thought was not a major part of the conversation. It was just really an inquiry with her
Mm.
around more of what was important to her and what she was thinking about, and how maybe one decision would impact her differently than the other. But I did not give her my opinion. And
Mm.
she was pissed off with me. It was like, I went to the UK to study, and I left a mother that did this, 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 and this for me. One that I could always count on, one that, I mean, she was pretty angry with me.
Yeah.
And I don't know what you've been studying or what you've been doing, but I don't like it. And I think you should stop it. And I want my mom back. I want my mommy back. I want the person who's always there for me and I don't feel like you're by my side anymore. And that shock of hearing that I don't feel like you're by my side, or the threat of severing the relationality or the engagement in the process, was again a visceral experience. It was like my heart was, for me, it's like somebody's pulling the plug out of the wall. It's like when there's a threat of disconnection, it's like my life force energy that's connected to your life force energy is going to be removed. And so that it almost feels like there's this in slow motion, this idea that the plug is coming out of the wall, and it's like me going, no, don't do that. And I was watching myself. So I have and one of my Enneagram phrases for my business is dancing between observation and participation.
Mm.
And I could feel the dance of observing, and I could feel the dance of participating. And it was just like everything was like slow-mo totally. And it was just like I stood my ground, and I knew that even though there was great discomfort, that it was the right thing to do. It was my right action. Um, and the contraction of my type was kind of going like, and I just stood my ground, and it was like a week before my daughter could forgive me for that. We had a week of her just she was rough with me.
Yeah.
And I knew that it was the right thing to do. I
Yeah.
kept coming back to it and telling her how much I loved her and how much I knew she had the resources to make these decisions. And
Mm.
that if I'd made those decisions, that somehow or another I would keep her from being empowered to make good
Mm.
choices in her life. And we kept coming back and revisiting that conversation for days.
Wow. Wow. Did you tell her all that about the empowerment of her, or was that more of your inner dialogue around how you held your ground?
I think I spoke some of it.
Mm.
I think that she's a body type and has lot of angry energy.
Mm.
So I'm not sure how I know I spoke some words about that, but I know that I probably pulled back in terms of revealing what I might do today, because
Yeah.
this is a long time ago.
Sure, sure, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow, wow. And if you can remember, how did you bear through those days?
I don't know. I don't know. I think just knowing that I was so in love with the Enneagram and had so much faith in how I was watching it unfold in other parts of my life, that I just knew instinctually that that was the right thing to do.
Mm.
That I have more faith in the Enneagram, uh, sustained faith that's unquestionable in the Enneagram than I have in my own religious practices. It has become my spiritual practice because it's taken the best from Buddhism and the best from Judaism and the best from the Enneagram and kind of created some concoction that is my spiritual life.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. As you're speaking, I am curious, not everyone buys into even the notion of wings or instinctual stacking. And I'm curious if you have a connection to a particular wing or instinctual stacking.
Sure, my instinctual stacking is changed, I think, a bit, but it's always been sexual on the top and then social on the bottom or in the middle. So I've gone from sexual with probably more self-pres today to social being my repressed. And I think in the past I've been sexual with more social in the middle and self-pres. I think as I've gotten older,
Mhm.
I'm far more aware of what it takes to take care of myself.
Mm.
And I wonder sometimes that about self-pres being a very important part as it unfolds in two's personal growth, because it takes a lot of attention, intention, and attention for self-care and the noticing of what one needs to move into self-pres. And yet I know that it's a biological imperative, but there's just this questioning that I've had around whether or not that's absolutely an imperative for my maybe my own personal growth.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm. Yeah, very interesting. With those I've worked with who identify as self-preservation dominant, more, in the two realm, what I have actually seen tends to lean toward, it's almost more like it's more you become more fixated or compulsive when that piece is gone, when that piece isn't being met, whether unconsciously or consciously, right? We can kind of unconsciously create a life scenario where, you know, the stability and the resources are there, you know, but when they're not, it's much more disruptive than it is when folks have different stacking. So that's one way I know, because truly this is where so many twos would be like, well, I can't be self-pres because I'm not good at, you know, taking care of myself. I'm like, you know, it's not about whether you're good at it. It's about what happens to you when you don't got it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No,
Right?
that's a really good point. A really good point.
Yeah.
And my wings have changed too, as as a younger two, my 3-wing was all I had. I had very difficult time accessing my oneness.
Mm.
I've done a lot of work to balance my wings and to access my oneness, because I've gotten in a lot of trouble in my life because I have had a blind spot to my one wing.
Mm.
And so today I think I have more access to 1 than 3, but certainly 3 is the easiest easiest for me to access, because I'm a do.
Yeah, yeah. I could hear a lot of the oneness in. I mean, what I heard you describe with your daughter is you're standing in this principle that you had come to believe in, right? That to adhere to a principle sort of bigger than people pleasing, you know, it's almost like the shift from people pleasing to principled living, you know, and that principle being almost like a stronghold for you to come home, to keep coming to yourself. That's what I heard in what you shared. Yeah. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Wow, what what a great story. And I think really helpful for all twos listening, because there is always this like, oh, what happens in my relationships if I do this in a work, you know, and I want folks to know, well, it's not immediately good news. Like,
Yeah, right.
you should know that. And it's not always the case that the daughter will reconcile, you know, and it really is a question of like, will you still want to come home enough? Will you value yourself enough? Will you love, you know, this inner being enough to do it anyway? You know? Yeah, yeah. So I would love to hear, because again, I think that, okay, so earlier you talked about identifying as a 7, and of course, both, for those newer to the Enneagram, both fall into the conflict style of positive outlook, right? So there's something, you know, like that where both can have this sort of positive reframe, and there is a tendency in a more habituated type 2s of like having a positive view of self that the 2 wants mirrored back. And so within that, it can be more challenging to acknowledge some qualities that might not feel so favorable. I'm curious about your journey with that.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of qualities that I've found that are unfavorable.
So,
Yeah. With shadow work and with just leaving space for everything to exist together, and like having a day where I don't feel kind to other people. I mean, I just don't want to be kind to other people, or I don't want to be around other people, or I don't want to be helpful to other people, or I the notion of being self-focused and not selfish or selfless, but just focusing on self and seeing my needs, because the twos will avoid their own needs, and it's fueled by the pride. You know, it's like, I don't really have any needs. You have needs, but I don't have needs. And so finding a relationship with being needy or having needs and not being needy, that every human has needs, and then not tipping so much I'm either self-deprecating or self-inflated, and finding this balanced place where, oh, this is my need, this is where I'm at today, and I'm no better and no worse than anyone else. I'm just a human having a day to day, and it's okay not to go into that, again, self-deprecating or self-inflated place. Just it feels very much like a balancing kind of place, with just being okay with that, and also being okay with what I know. I mean, when I first started my Enneagram work and I learned about pride and humility, it was like, oh my goodness, I moved to the self-deprecating place because I just didn't want to be seen as prideful or needy, which is again being prideful and needy. It's like finding space to be a human in that process, and allowing that process to unfold, and all of it in the sweet spots of it, would that just automatically kind of just come out of, I am really, it's very easy for me to be compassionate and loving. But there are times when that's not happening. You know? There are lots of times when that's not happening. And I just traveling, recently, being both at the IEA conference and then going directly from there to Alaska, and noticing large crowds, being around large crowds, and how I wanted my own personal space, and how sometimes I really wanted to be helpful to other people, and other times watching someone maybe struggle and knowing that it's not my job to help them. And then dealing with the inner conflict of that, okay, I know that's not my job, and yet I want to do something, and I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, that
Right.
movement forward and backward around that. And then also taking what's mine, standing in my power and having an opinion about something, even if I don't agree with someone, and not acquiescing to allowing for the space of their belief, really kind of engaging the lack of contraction of type, and engaging my nineness, because nines and twos are so similar but so different. Just creating a space for somebody to have a very differing opinion and not needing to do anything about that. I mean, I could do that in my counseling and coaching practice because that's my profession, but doing that in my personal life, it's not as easy.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
You just said so much. Such a rich share. I want to go all the way back to the beginning of this part of your share, which we were talking about not being inflated or self-deprecating. You reminded me of Brene Brown's teachings on humility, where she talks about what it means to be right-sized. And this notion, it's not beneath or above. And it is this idea that, well, why do we ever need to feel we're above? Because if we're not above, says the two, I'm below. Like if I'm not beyond human and don't actually have needs, then I'm less than, and to honor that, actually, I can be right there, human, as you said, right? And like have needs like everyone else. And the okayness that with that sense of equality in a way with all human beings, that it is a jolt to the two system, is a saving grace for the soul. Right? That makes space of, finally, yes, like this is the field in which my needs like matter, are important, right?
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Even as simple as sitting in a seminar and needing to go to the bathroom and questioning myself about whether or not it's okay for me to go to the bathroom. And it's like just noticing that kind of banter back and forth of, oh, yeah, it's not only okay, but it's essential for you to do this. It sounds so silly, but that's what goes on.
Yes. And normally, until a person begins the inner journey, as you so very clearly have, it goes on unconsciously.
Right.
You don't have a choice. In that moment, you think, I'm not leaving because it might be rude to this person, or whether they think, or what other people feel about your leaving, even though I gotta pee, everybody.
That's right.
And then now you have choice. And like in that choice, freedom. Yeah, freedom. So beautiful. Yeah. And then you also kind of, you mentioned this movement forward, right? That there's this way, the difference between the two and the nine is, nines might be a little bit more reactive to, there is a disturbance in the force, but the habit of two is to move forward. And the awareness of the way you lean. And again, for those only listening, like Renee moved forward physically, that is like, oh, back it up.
Yeah.
But the two doesn't even know I'm like forward leaning.
Yeah. One great invitation to do the work is around flattery, because it's, when I first met the Enneagram, I noticed how often I would say to people around me, "Oh, you look beautiful," or "Oh, I love the color of your shirt," or "Oh, your smile is amazing," or "God, you're so nice," or just all this stuff that would come out of me, language that would come out of me. And so I deliberately, for long periods of time, would question, if you want to make offer a comment that's a compliment to someone, I want you to just notice and question yourself. Do you really mean that, or is there an agenda around that? And so
Oh,
that was a big part of my work for a long, long time. And although I'm not done with that at all, I noticed that how much less often I'll tell somebody. I might feel all of this, like I love the color of your blouse. It's beautiful. And you're such a beautiful person. But it's like, there's a part of me, it's like, am I wanting to say that for a reason? Or am I just going to just observe that and notice that what it feels like inside, and just backing up and just allowing myself to experience the thought? It's still a compliment. It's still the noticing, but there's no agenda around it if it's not stated.
yeah.
And just noticing what it feels like inside, not to state it, and to just allow it to be with me. There can still be something very fulfilling, but the fulfillment is around something that's much richer if I don't say it out loud.
Mm, mm. Yeah, yeah. Wow. I could feel you as you were speaking that. And when you use the term fulfill, like I really had this sense of, oh my goodness, appreciation,
Mhm,
appreciation. Like there's some energy of it that is very interior, actually.
mhm.
Like whereas there's a gratitude or something expressed outward, but when I appreciate a tree, I am filled up by that
Yes.
by that sense. Yeah, that's what I hear in your description. That's profound. And for those listening, there is this place where there's exploration and experimentation around checking in regarding like these things that were previously almost like compulsive, right? And that doesn't mean that you don't still offer compliments to people. It just means you have, again, more choice around it, more consciousness, more intentionality, and more of an awareness of your motivation, it
The
sounds like,
motivation
right?
that's key. It's, what am I doing? Do I have an agenda around this? Do I want to be? Because there's a part of me that always wants to be liked. And it's like, I have to remind myself, it's really not that important. That really has, in the scheme of things, I have placed that in the past as a really high priority. And that's really not that important. As long as I'm liking myself,
Mhm.
that's the piece. Because I think so often twos are doing that because they can't get that sense of liking themselves. The Enneagram gave me an opportunity to fall in love with myself as myself, and without any need for that coming from another place. It's also really awakened my inner critic in a way that's not so much fun either. So I don't want it to sound like, it's all shits and giggles here. um, but it's also given me a path, yeah, for
Yes. Yeah, no, I really appreciate again when you can hold both like that because oftentimes what I see is that it's not the um oh, but here's my inner critic, at the forefront. If anything, the inner critic was always there. It's just that with the lack of interior gaze, the two doesn't see it. And isn't then able to even love all parts of you, including
right.
that critic, and why it's even there, trying to help you get your needs met in the world through its unskillful, we're going to use a Buddhist term here, through some unskillful means sometimes, right? But you don't even know that's there. But most other people do,
Mhm.
like
Right.
except for the person themselves, because they can't see it, because they're not willing to hold any darkness inside of them,
Mhm.
the notion. And so the power of you holding that. And then so as we come to a close, there's one thing I want to come back to just very briefly, is when you mentioned the 9 space. I want to make sure I understand this correctly, but what it sounded like you were saying is that when you can tap into sort of an intentional 9 space, there's more space for you. Whereas in your 2ness, it sounds like there's some need for, my view to be also your view, like kind of, and so that there's this enmeshment almost with the identity, whereas there's broadening of space in 9ness that can kind of hold more and hold the diversity. And that way you get to hold yourself and you get to hold the other. Yeah.
Right. There's an increased capacity when that contraction is released. There's an increased capacity that just is much more expansive than when I'm just engaged in my own character structure.
Beautiful. Yeah. So I could ask so many more questions of you, and I'm so grateful for your time. But I think that I'd like to close by asking if you have counsel for the young 2 on the journey. And I don't mean young in age, I mean young to the journey here, the Enneagram informed journey of awakening. What would that be? What counsel would that be?
Well, because there's an avoidance of needs or neediness, it's important that there is a community that you can participate in. Trying to do, I think for all types, trying to do it alone is very difficult. But 2s, particularly 2s with 3 wings, they not only want to be helpful, but they want to teach it yesterday and give it away. Very much like 3s with 2 wings do. There's that kind of similar, and I'm sure you can relate to that as we talk about this. But finding community, I think, is really important, and not doing this by yourself. And not all Enneagram communities are equal. The nice thing about the Enneagram is that there's opportunities to do this online, and I have found the international community to be so rich because it's not US centric. And that's another prideful place that a 2 can sit in, with the Enneagram community having such a global presence these days. Finding ways to engage with people globally, finding ways to come home to yourself. So having a practice, continuing to do this without just giving it away. Don't teach as soon as you begin to learn. Do your own work first. Find a community, develop practices, and find ways to fall in love with yourself. Whatever space that may take, and it's an easy space for a 2 to look like they're doing that work, but you don't really get to fall in love with yourself or begin that process until you can really access the neediness and the pride and the darkness and the shadow work and the cruelty and the coldness and the desire to be alone. And alongside of that, because 2s don't have a line to a head type, make sure to explore your line to 5. The time that I have spent by myself, even though I did not welcome it initially, the time that I have spent by myself has been the richest time. So it may sound contradictory when I'm saying find a community and find time by yourself. It's not. There'll be plenty of time with good Enneagram community support and practice that will encourage you to find time to spend by and with yourself.
Yeah, profound and so powerful. I'm so grateful for your words. And what I hear is, again, it's community where you're receiving. It's not community where you're teaching. And that's the huge difference of like, oh, let me help this community versus, oh, how can I receive support for my inner journey here? Yeah. Yeah. So with that, I would love to invite you to close our time together with either a prayer, a meditation, a poem that inspires you.
I guess breathing into yourself and just noticing what it takes to come home. Just noticing. You don't really have a particular poem. Just being with yourself and knowing that, as much as that may be very, very, very hard to notice your interior landscape, what's going on. Just welcoming all of it. welcoming the energy that wants to move forward and be helpful and generous and kind, and also welcome the energy when you're aware of it that just needs to fill its own well, to fill your own well, and to be with yourself. And for that to be okay. All of it.
So it is.
So it is.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you so very much.
You're very welcome. It was a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you everyone for tuning in, and I'll see you on our next episode. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.